Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar all about how to use metrics for benchmarking and optimizing the performance of your SDR teams. Today's session is going to have a particular focus on talking about enterprise sales development. So that'll be the main focus of the topic today. Very excited about this session. I see that a lot of the attendees are SDR leaders from all over. So very excited about this topic. Also, please, can we have as much interaction as possible? This LinkedIn live format is a little bit strange because I can't interact directly with people, but please, if you have questions, comments at any point in time, please fire away with questions and I'll pick them up as we go through the webinar. And the more interaction I can get from everybody who's in attendance, the better. And next up, what I'll do is I will give you all a quick intro to myself. While I'm doing that, it would be great to hear from everybody who's watching. If you can, in the chat, can also just drop a quick note of where you are joining from today. So, quick intro to myself. I'm the CEO of a company called Delta V. We've been going for around 5 years. And what we do is we build and run outbound SDR teams. We provide these teams as a fully managed solution, which embeds into our customers' sales organizations. We have a particular domain focus on working with enterprise software companies, so companies that are selling high-ticket, complex solutions into large enterprises. And then the other kind of area of domain expertise is financial technology. And in terms of my background, I've been building and running sales teams for at least 15 years. I'm struggling to keep track of time these days, but I've been building sales teams for a long time. And for me personally, like my approach to thinking about how you operate a high-performance sales team is the starting point is process, and having a metrics framework which you use to kind of understand what's going on in your process and optimize that process. And that's really what we're going to be talking all about today, is figuring out what metrics we should be using and then how to use them, not just kind of to see, look at things like activity levels, but actually use them to understand performance and diagnose issues in rep performance. And I'll also be talking through areas around things like benchmarking and where to get benchmarks from and those sorts of things. Guys, please fire away with any questions that you have around metrics, SDR metrics, sales metrics as we go along. I'd love to have lots of questions coming through while we're going through this. Alrighty, let's get on to talking about metrics. So if you're running a SDR team or a sales team, more broadly speaking, why do we need metrics? So the answer to this is really kind of starting point is to say, what are the types of metrics and what do we use them for? And so sales is very much an outcomes-driven game where end of the day, you need to be producing certain results. So the starting point in kind of understanding metrics is we want outcome metrics, which is setting goals for what needs to be achieved. And specifically when we're talking SDR work, that could be metrics you could be tracking could be things like meetings sat, sales accepted leads, so meetings that have been passed to sales and sales have accepted, or pipeline value created. Those are kind of the types of outcomes metrics that you could be tracking, and that might be very specific to your business. Very interested to hear from everybody what you guys are tracking at the moment in terms of outcomes metrics. The other set of metrics that you want to be tracking and have a framework around is activity metrics. And really what activity metrics are is that what you're doing is you're providing SDR team members with a roadmap for what they need to do in order to be successful and hit the results that they're targeted with. And so that's the one reason why you have them. And then the other reason why you have them is for people who are SDR managers, and it's great. There are many SDR managers on this call today, but it's really about equipping yourself with a framework for managing activity, managing process, and actually driving process adherence, which I'm a massive believer in. I believe that you can get reps 50% of the way to success just by making sure they are following the right process and they have the right activity levels. And then also obviously managing, managing results, and then also identifying performance gaps. And what we'll be doing today as well is we will be talking about how you use metrics to also identify and remedy performance gaps. But examples of kind of activity metrics that you might be tracking could be things like contacts added, dials made per day, email sent, all those kinds of items. So those are the types of activity metrics that you might be thinking about. But this is basically the two sets of metrics that we want to put in place if we're trying to create a really repeatable scientific sales process. All right, so where do we get our metrics from? Now, I've worked in businesses where metrics have been completely thumb-sucked. I have also run businesses where, to some extent, the metrics were thumb-sucked. That is not how we operate now at Delta V. But basically, if you're going to go and create a metrics framework that you're going to be using for tracking, managing activity and outputs, you need to have a robust way of actually developing your framework and realistically figuring out what metrics you want to be putting in place to track and monitor team performance. So there's two ways you're going to be getting metrics. One is from top down, which really is saying, what are the results that we need to be achieving to get ROI on our investment or achieve specific growth goals as a business? And often that is going to be coming down from a leadership level in your business in terms of like the outputs that you need to be generating. The other place that you're going to get metrics from is kind of from bottom up. And that is where what you're doing is you are going to be saying how much activity and what outputs can a rep realistically produce per day. And this is one of the critical things around sales, because in sales, time is our scarcest asset. We only have so much time available. And unlike someone working in, say, a dev role where you can maybe make up time by working evenings, working weekends, in sales, we're generally having to do the bulk of work when our prospects or buyers are available, which is going to be working hours. So we have limited time to actually operate in. And so we've got to be very realistic about kind of what activity and what output somebody can produce per day. In an ideal world is if you've go through a process of figuring out from a top down what you need to achieve, you're marrying that up with a bottom up set of metrics that actually align with one another. But I think that what often happens in many businesses is that targets, metrics get set from the top down. And then if you actually go and do an analysis of what's required from a bottom up level to produce those two things don't necessarily line up. So if we're going to go and start thinking about, okay, how do we create a set of metrics that we want to hold reps accountable to? We need to go and get these from somewhere, because what happens is if you don't have a reliable basis for setting up your metrics, one is that your reps are not going to trust them because they're going to be like, what is the basis in reality from these metrics? And the other side of it is for you as a leader, it's actually very hard to manage people if you don't actually for sure know that your metrics are right. So you want to make sure that you actually have understood what's required and what is possible, and then have created a realistic kind of set of activity metrics and outcome metrics that you're going to measure your team's performance on, and that you can hold them accountable to, and then you can have that they can trust in and that you can also trust in. And so this is a process I've been through a few times in different businesses when I've been figuring out a sales motion. But basically, what you want to do is you want to go through a process of making sure you've got a very robust set of metrics And you want to go and collect information from a range of sources to kind of go and build the initial model that you're going to use. So how do you do this? So one will be your own experience. If you have past experience in sales, if you past experience in sales development, or as a business you've been doing a volume of sales activity, you will have experience, internal data, and learnings about what is realistic in terms of output and in terms of activity. So that is one input. Another input that you can use is to go and use is to look at industry reports. So probably my slide here has just gone a little bit funny, but the best industry reports that I've seen in terms of giving you very robust metrics for SDRs are one, the Bridge Group, who produce very, very nice reports every year. If you haven't seen the Bridge Group report, just go look up a Bridge Group SDR metrics report. Another very nice reports which don't get put out anymore. There was a business called Topo who now have been bought by Gartner, and they have some reports that were put out, I think, until the early 2020s. As a framework, they may be a little bit out of date, but they really have very detailed and well-explained kind of benchmarks for what SDRs in different motions and targeting different sizes of organizations should be producing. So if you want to find some of those reports, they're a little bit harder to find, but if you search for sort of Topo, SDR, benchmark, PDF, or something like that, you'll still find a few of the kind of PDFs of those reports floating around the web. Maybe a little bit out of date, but still a good starting point if you're trying to create a baseline for kind of measuring what you're doing. If you take your own experience, you take data from industry reports, you still want to test that a little bit. And another great way to kind of test how you're thinking about like the metrics that you're setting up is to go is via kind of networks and communities. So that networks could be directly your own network of other sales leaders, or it could be online sales community. So for instance, Modern Sales Pro is a sales community that's very easy to join. SDR Leaders of EMEA is also a very nice sales community. I'm fairly sure there are quite a few people from SDR Leaders of EMEA on this call today. So shout out to all of you. But basically, being part of these communities, you can hear what other people are doing, and you can also test what you're doing in conversations that you have, whether it be on the Slack groups or via in-person meetings that they set up. So once you've gone and kind of set up your metrics, you're now in a position to actually start using them to help your team or SDR team members know what they need to do. And so this slide really is all about kind of setting expectations with a new outbound rep, and it covers some of the kind of what I've seen to be the sort of common sort of benchmarks for rep output and rep activity. So if you're targeting large enterprise, which is really the focus of today's session, reps are generally going to be generating 6 to 8 qualified meetings. So we call those sales accepted leads in my business, but generating 6 to 8 sales accepted leads, which are not just meetings that are booked into the calendar, but meetings that have actually been sat and confirmed to be a meeting with the right person at the right company. If you're going from mid-market to smaller businesses, those number of sales accepted leads could go up to as high as 12. We don't necessarily see this always working out like that, but that is kind of often the benchmark. And then if you're going to SME, which is a space that we don't play in at all, so I could be very, very off on this, reps should be generating 12 plus, somewhere between 12 and 20 meetings per month. That is kind of the benchmark, but we don't have a lot of internal data in my business to validate whether that is kind of correct. And then also just in terms of these kind of, for someone to get to their full quota of meetings being hit, say it's 6 meetings per month, generally like that ramp up is going to take them 3 months. And their first meeting, first month they'd set up generate 2 SALs. In their second month, they'd generate 4 SALs. In their third month, they would generate 6 SALs. Luciana, so you have a question about what do we class as enterprise in terms of number of employees. So that is a great question. I think the sort of general definition of that is a company with 1,000 plus employees. And like mid-market is probably, I think it's somewhere either 200 or 500 up to 1,000 employees. But generally enterprise anywhere with 1,000 plus. I mean, in terms of the work that we're doing, we're often targeting specifically companies that have got something like 10,000 or more employees, or we're talking 500 million plus USD in annual revenue. So I guess it depends a little bit, but yeah, baseline benchmark is 1,000 employees. So, Trevor, thanks for sharing that link. That is exactly what I was talking about in terms of Bridge Group. So in terms of setting activity metrics for a rep, you'll notice that I have here, I say activity metrics for roadmap for success. The risk of having activity metrics in place that you hold reps accountable to is that they become a stick that you beat people with, rather than a way of positioning with a rep. This is, if you want to hit these outcomes, if you want to make this, earn this amount of commission, this is what you need to do to get there. So I think what you really want to do is you want to make sure that when you're setting expectations with a new rep, you want to be positioning certain volumes of activity as their roadmap for success, not as the stick that you're going to be beating them with if they don't perform. In our motion, we're generally doing account-based, well-researched outreach, and so on a daily basis, what that looks like is a rep is adding 12 new contacts into sequences per day, and then the typical outreach sequence is we'll have around 5 emails in it, 10 dials, and a couple of LinkedIn steps as well. And that's, once you've a rep has ramped up, that should turn into a relatively steady pattern of them doing around 60 outbound dials per day, and sending around 30 outbound emails per day. One of the other critical metrics that I'll probably talk about a lot in the session is also making sure that reps have 0 overdue tasks. So what you want is that, so the critical metrics for tracking is, one, making sure on a consistent basis, every single day, a rep is adding a minimum number of new contacts into outbound sequences. Then via your sales engagement platform, the various tasks are going to come due, so calls, dials, emails, those sorts of things. But what you want to do is you want to make sure that they are completing all the tasks that come due every single day. So you want to very actively track that their overdue tasks and make sure that they have no overdue tasks, so that everything is getting completed on time. We've seen this to have a massive impact on rep performance when they don't complete their tasks in time. What will happen as well when you bring a new rep into your business is they're not going to hit these numbers from day one. It's generally going to take them 30 days to get to the point where they've completely filled their pipe and their activity levels are starting to, hit these numbers. And we've also found it to be that this is a pretty robust if you're not using parallel dialers, things like that, we found this to be like a fairly robust framework for managing rep performance, and it's hard for them to consistently do more than this. The way that I position activity metrics with reps is like, activity is the one thing that you have full control over. So, and what you want to make sure is that if you have consistent activity, you're going to get consistent outcomes. And I think that this comes back to the thing about every day adding a similar volume of new contacts into sequences. We've also had times where we've tried like a sprint approach, where we push a whole volume of contacts into sequences and then we execute on the sequences. And what we found is that the outcomes have been significantly worse than when we just have consistent activity. So I think that's really important. And then it's nice to also give reps an example of what their outbound funnel looks like, where what you're explaining to them is like, activity volumes times quality equals results. And so the way to position that is, if you add 240 new contacts into sequences in a month, this should ultimately turn into 7 meetings booked if you're assuming a 3% conversion rate. So 1 in every 33 contacts that you're reaching out to is going to give you a meeting. Any questions about positioning and setting expectations with a rep before I move on? Okay, so this is an example of having created an activity, a framework for kind of benchmarking rep activity, and then tracking activity against that. And what I'll be doing is I'll be chatting you through how we use this to kind of track, to kind of monitor and optimize rep performance. And so I'll take you through this from kind of top to bottom in terms of the benchmarks that I have in this table, and then explain to you kind of what these numbers mean. These are kind of all dummy numbers, and this is a dummy framework, but essentially what it is about is showing you kind of how we track people, how we create benchmarks, and then we track activity against those benchmarks. And so you then can quickly see if what's needing to be done is being done. So and so the starting point in terms of rep activity is feeding their pipeline, and that is making sure they have enough new qualified contacts going into sequences. And so if we're assuming there's 20 working days in a month and they're adding 12 contacts per day into sequences, that should roughly be around 240 new contacts. Based on activity and tasks that will come due from sequences, that should result in around 600 emails being sent. And if you're getting a 5% reply rate on emails, which is like the absolute like bee's knees of email reply rates, you should be seeing like 30 email replies. And then dials, again, if a rep's doing 60 dials a day, should be doing 1,200 dials a month. If we assume a connect rate, which means that for the rate at which dials convert and somebody actually picking up the phone, we assume a connect rate of 5%, which we see to be very true. That should result in around a rep having 60 conversations per month. So these are our kind of baseline activity metrics in this model. And then what we have as benchmark in terms of the number of meetings booked, and then the number of meetings sat. What you will see under the meetings booked total is we also have, so there'll be a total number of meetings that get booked, but what we want to do is a little bit of attribution as well to understand where are the meetings coming from. And you'll see in a second why this is really important, but it helps you understand what's actually working and not working in your outbound motion. So you want to see what volume of what volume of meetings have been getting generated from positive email replies, where the first kind of positive interaction was an email reply, and what volume of emails are coming from calls, where the first positive interaction with a prospect was a call. And you can do the same thing for LinkedIn as well, if LinkedIn is a big part of your process. But what you would do then is kind of, if you're tracking these metrics, you can then very quickly see in terms of baseline process control of your rep, is rep adding enough contact prospects to feed their pipe? Are they sending enough emails to get enough replies? Are they doing enough dials to get enough connects? Are they ultimately booking enough meetings? And in terms of meetings sat, are those meetings actually turning into meetings that are being held? So in this example here with the slides, we've got this is the assumption here. This is a new rep. So in the first month of activity, the activity is going to be lower across the board. And we see it slowly ramp up over the first 3 months to kind of the optimal type of activity levels that we want to be seeing for the rep. What you'll also see is that like the number of meetings booked does not correspond with the number of meetings that are actually getting sat. That is because there's often a lag between when you book in a meeting and when a meeting takes place. So for instance, a meeting could get booked in January, but only get sat in February. And then there's also often a fall-off rate. So the benchmark there is something like 85% of the meetings that you book should actually take place and turn into sales accepted leads. So if we collect those base metrics, we can now go and look at conversion rates. This is really where we get into the interesting stuff of understanding what's working and what isn't working in terms of a SDR, kind of SDR's activity, or if you consolidate all these numbers in terms of the activity of an SDR team that maybe is targeting a specific vertical or market or something like that. So, and I'll talk you through benchmarks for these types of conversion rates. So number one, we track email reply rates as in terms of a conversion rate. And if you are targeting exactly the right people with a very relevant message, they can be replying to you at a rate of up to 5%. And this is not with personalized messaging, AI, clay messages. This is literally templates using merge fields, but where you're targeting exactly the right people with a highly relevant message. So so that's our benchmark of our email reply rate. We often don't see you getting quite to those levels, but generally, if you're trying to understand, hey, is our email messaging healthy? Probably, particularly for enterprise, reply rates of anywhere where kind of 2% up are really good. Then we track email replies per meeting booked and that email reply rate conversion. We don't necessarily have a benchmark for how we think about at what rate email replies should turn into booked meetings. The reason being is that we're running SDR teams for lots of different companies and we see big divergence in these. But even if a lot of your replies are not turning into meetings, the way we think about a high reply rate on emails, it means that your messaging is relevant enough to the people that you're putting it in front of that they feel compelled to reply to you, even if they're not interested. The next kind of key sort of conversion rate that we look at is phone connect rate. And like the well-accepted industry benchmark is 5%. We see this to be super, super true in reaching out in EMEA. We can see it go up to sort of 6-7%. And in some markets, we can see it sitting at 10 or 12%. But those are generally markets where there's a low volume of outbound outreach and people are less kind of phone fatigued, call it that way. So first off, phone connect, but mention if you see like if a phone connect rate is falling below 5%, like that is a big warning sign in terms of optimizing rep performance, because it either means that a rep is actively trying not to connect with prospects, and that is sometimes really hard to figure out. But it could be that they are making dials, but they are finding ways to make sure that the prospect don't pick up the phone. Or it could be that there are issues with your phone number and it's being marked as spam. So when it's coming up on people's phone as spam. So rotating out phone numbers that your reps are using is quite important as well, and making sure that they're not phone numbers that are being marked as spam. But you need to maintain a 5% connect rate. Then in terms of understanding understanding kind of how well are those conversations going, you want to understand how many phone connects does it take to book a meeting. Now, depending on the size of type of organization you're targeting, your proposition, and various other factors, this can vary significantly. But if we're talking reaching out to large enterprise where it's hard to get hold of people, when you get hold of them, they're super busy and they don't want to talk. Generally, it takes somewhere between 15 and 20 conversations to secure a meeting. So you've got to could be that you have to connect with 15 different people to get one of them to agree to meeting with you. The other kind of metric that we look at as an overall kind of health metric for kind of outbound motion is what is our conversion rate on contacts? So saying how many contacts does it take to book a meeting? So the idea being is that, like, we say that overall, for every 33 contacts that you're reaching out to an enterprise, you should be securing at least one meeting. And so regardless of channels, regardless of reply rates, regardless of all the kind of more granular metrics, that's more like the sort of overall metric that we use to health check the performance of a particular outbound motion. So putting this all together, and I'm not sure how well you guys can see all the numbers in here, but let me talk you through how if you turn all of this information into a single report, how you can use this to understand rep performance and make sure that you are having the right activity levels and figure out what's working and what needs to be improved. So basically, the baseline metrics that you want to track are you want to track the basic activity that a rep is doing. So that's our contacts enrolled, emails sent, conversations, meetings booked, and those sorts of things. Straight away, what you will then do is, if a rep is not performing, you can go and look at activity, and that's the first thing to look at. It's the easiest thing to fix. So you go and look at your activity metrics and say, is the rep's activity at the right level? So first off, are they actually feeding their pipeline with enough contact? If they're not adding enough people into sequences, they're never going to be successful. So that would be the first thing you want to increase. Then in terms of emails, generally we don't see volumes of emails being much of an issue. But if there are not enough emails going out, you'd want to dig into understanding why are emails not hitting the benchmarks. Sometimes it could just be because people are replying at a really high rate and they're leaving cadence early, but that is something that you want to check into. And then if you're seeing very low email replies, you want to then go and understand what the reason for that is. And that could either be there's something wrong with the emails the rep is sending in terms of how they are doing things, or it could be in terms of how you have enabled them. You have not enabled them with messaging that is going to work well. And so we find that for when we're launching a campaign with a customer, one of the early indicators of us going to having a high performing campaign is that we see a high early email reply rate. So Trevor, you've got a great question here. It's like, assuming you're not meeting those outcome metrics and you've ruled out technical issues, how do you determine what other factors affect performance? So that is exactly what I'm going through now. And by the end of this, I will cover exactly kind of how you can use this as a starting point to understand rep performance. So anyway, so email replies is often like, it's either, is there something that's wrong with what rep's doing in terms of emails, or is there some kind of technical issue, like do we have a spammy email address? Or do we have the wrong message for the wrong people? Next thing around dials is like basically like reps should generally be hitting these numbers of dials in terms of like, but what if they're not, you want to be understanding why that's not happening and whether there's some kind of call reluctance. And then similarly, you want to be understanding the connect rate, are they hitting the right number of connects to be successful? So if a rep is hitting all the right baseline metrics, but they're not getting the right volume of meetings, then the next step is to take a step down to go and say, okay, well, let's understand kind of conversion metrics by channel. And this is where you go and look at your, you can go and say, hey, are emails working or not? More critically, you can go and look at phone calls. So if you've got the right volume of calls, you've got the right phone connect rate, but you see there's a rep has a very high volume of connects to meeting booked. So they have to have many, many conversations to book a meeting. That often points to potentially an issue with call execution. So that means that that's often a trigger for you to go and review a bunch of the reps' calls, identify what they're doing incorrectly, run additional training, do more role plays, and create and support them in that area. So those are so what you can do is you don't just look at activity, you can actually start to get a feel for where you need to look next in terms of execution. And then also overall conversion metric really is just like I said before, just an overall health check for campaign. But sometimes what you can get to with this is a world where what you've done is you're looking at rep activity and you say rep activity is great. You then go and look at rep execution in terms of like, are they doing a good job when they're sending emails? Are they doing a good job on calls? And you find that that quality of execution is also still good, but they're still not getting the results. Then the question is, what is it that is affecting or impacting our outbound motion? And generally that's going to come down to more around like the enablement of what you're providing the reps. So in many cases, it could be that there's an issue with your ideal customer profile. Or if your ideal customer profile is right, it means that you're targeting the wrong people in those organizations. Or if those two things are 100% correct, it could mean that there's an issue with your proposition and it's not sufficiently compelling that people actually want to part with their time to find out more about it. Trevor, I hope that adequately answers your question about understanding kind of performance. Just another question from Trevor around A/B testing messaging at the beginning of a new campaign. So the thing about A/B testing is that you need a very high volume of, say, emails to actually do a statistically significant A/B test. And like if you're targeting large enterprise organizations in a very clearly defined ICP, you're actually not going to have, we're talking maybe 1,000 or 2,000 organizations with, you know, a few thousand people working in those organizations overall that you want to reach out to. And that often in many cases is not a large enough audience to go and run like a really reliable like A/B test. So the way that we actually think about messaging often is more like you have a benchmark which you measure performance against. If performance is not at the level that you want versus the benchmark, you then do the next iteration or change in the messaging to try and raise results in terms of things like email reply rates. So that is the so that's kind of putting this all together in terms of a framework. And we find this to be extremely powerful in terms of managing reps and helping them perform, because very quickly we can get a very quick snapshot of where the gaps are in terms of what they're doing and where we need to support them or hold them accountable. So one of the things as well, so you might have a metrics framework, you might have all these metrics, you might have these benchmarks, but a critical part of this is creating accountability for reps and holding them accountable, and doing this not on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, but doing this on a daily basis. So my recommended way of doing things is that you run a daily huddle with your reps, and in that huddle, every day, reps report on their activity, and you monitor that activity versus the kind of baseline of what they should be doing. So this is an example of a Google Sheet which you could use for reps in your huddle. So every day a rep comes in and plugs in their numbers from what they did the day before. And so what we'd track on a daily basis in a huddle would be how many new contacts has the rep added per day? Have they hit the number that they need to be hitting as a minimum? We also get them to plug in the number of emails they sent, the number of email replies that they got, how many calls they made, and how many connects they had. On a daily basis, we don't care too much about these volumes, because what will happen as well is that in a cadence or sequence, the volume of tasks that come due for a rep on a given day is going to fluctuate somewhat. So it's not always going to be consistently the same number, but what we want to see is that roughly speaking, they are about right, and on a weekly basis, they are kind of getting up to the right number. So if you see here, so there's on a daily basis, the number of emails that a rep might send might fluctuate, but in a given week, we want to see them hitting a certain number. Similarly, in terms of number of calls or dials made, we also want to see that hitting a similar number. And then we also track meetings booked. So they report on how many meetings they booked in the previous day. And then the last kind of critical element is overdue tasks, which I mentioned earlier on, making sure that getting reps to report on how many overdue tasks they have and making sure that there are no overdue tasks. So the key things on a daily basis that we really care about from an accountability point of view with reps is that, one, they are sufficiently feeding their pipeline with new contacts, and then they are making sure they're executing all their tasks on time, which means that they have no overdue tasks at the end of each day. So that is kind of how we think about this. I see there's a question from Marissa as well that I missed, which is, how big a role does seasonality play in SDR performance, and how do you adjust your benchmarks during periods like European summer? So this is actually like a great question because it relates a lot to accountability. Now, in the world of sales, there are always going to be reasons or external reasons why things are not going like you want them to. All right. So it could be holidays, it could be war breaking out, it could be all sorts of things, kind of that theoretically are external factors that could impact reps' performance. But the issue is, if you start making excuses for reps, they are automatically going to take those excuses as a reason for not performing. So what you want to do is you want to be completely consistent in terms of how you hold them accountable. You do not want to change your numbers for seasonality, and you never ever want to let the rep off the hook by saying, oh no, don't worry that you didn't do so well this month. It's seasonal factors that played a role. The rep needs to be 100% accountable for their own performance, regardless of external factors. If you start kind of letting reps feel like they are, if you start letting reps kind of have excuses for poor performance, you're on a slippery slope to having no performance. All right, so that covers everything that I wanted to chat through today. If anybody has additional questions, please fire away. I'll probably I'll hang around for as long as you guys want with questions. Okay, so Riza, I said you asked here, I know the focus on SDR, but the framework change for account managers dealing with repeat customers. So I think that is, I can't give you a definitive answer on that, but I would say that you definitely want it to be holding account managers responsible for having a certain volume of interactions with their existing customers. And what we often also see happen is that account managers will not go beyond the people who are put in front of them at an existing account for them to talk to. So they don't go and expand their network and their influence. So you might also want to be having some kind of metrics where you are tracking something like new people in the organization met or new stakeholders met or something like that. So they're actually building bigger engagement in the account and can kind of unlock those opportunities for kind of expansion business, or making sure that when you get to renewal time, that renewals do in fact happen. So Trevor, so you're assuming part of reps' job to source contacts to feed their funnel. So that depends. Sometimes you can just serve up lists of contacts to reps. I experienced, like, particularly in the world of enterprises, you need to spend time navigating an account. It's not often just like find someone with this job title and like reach out to them. So there is a bit of time that a rep has to spend, at the very least, poking around LinkedIn, making sure they actually have got all the right people. So in terms of the tool set for like finding the right people, there are a few things. Like first off, you need to have a data set for kind of target accounts, which you qualify in. Then if you qualify in an account, you would probably go to LinkedIn and use Sales Nav to find the right people. And then what you want to do is you want to enrich that information with data from a data provider. So you could use Cognizant, ZoomInfo, Apollo, Lucia, and then from there, push that contact through into your sales engagement platform. So Carl, you've got a question. Is there a specific tool set that we're using for the SDR team on calls, emails? So the sales engagement platform that we use is SalesLoft, which works great. I mean, typically, anybody who's serious about running an SDR team is probably going to be using either Outreach or SalesLoft as their sales engagement platform. And then from a data perspective, you will be using at least one data provider to get phone numbers and email addresses. What we found is that really getting mobile numbers and working mobile numbers is the biggest driver from a kind of contact data point of view, or the biggest driver of success from a contact data point of view. So we generally are using at least 3 different data providers to try and at the very least get a working phone number for a contact that we're reaching out to. I think we can probably get to around 50-60% of the people we're reaching out to, we can get a mobile number for. Alrighty, do we have any more questions before we wrap up? All right, excellent. Thank you, everybody. And I think we will leave things there. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions on LinkedIn. Add me I think most of us are connected anyway, but yeah, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn if you have questions, or yeah, just drop me a line.